You remind me of a friend. A girl called Rappa.
Is she as weak as me?
Well, can you crush a star with your bare hands?
Can she?
She can't. But she always insists that she can.
Hello everyone, with Rappa being our next 5-star imaginary character who falls under the path of erudition, let's see if she can maybe crush a star. Her kit has been finalized with version 4 for some time now and should release by the 21st or 22nd of October. The way I'll explain her kit will be out of order, but should be the easiest way to understand. This is also my first time using DaVinci Resolve, so the editing will likely be very simple this time around. But with that out the way, let's get into the kit. Firstly, her base stats. She has the 5th highest attack in the game with average HP and defense. These stats aren't too important including the attack as she's a break focused character. She does have one trace which converts excess attack into a break vulnerability on the enemy, which is nice, but it's not the end all be all. But knowing that she is a break character, we can deduce that speed and break effect will be very vital for her. Unfortunately, she has a base speed of 96, which is tied for being the 6th slowest in the game, with Jinglu and Himiko. Speaking of speed, we do get some from her traces. By fully leveling this up, we get 9 speed, bringing Rappa to 105 speed and 13.3 break, which is pretty nice. The 28% attack isn't too useful for her overall gameplay, but it does contribute to the break vulnerability trace as mentioned earlier. Now to the important thing, her energy. She has a 140 cost ult post version 4, which is better than her original 160 cost version 1 and 150 on version 3. This is still on the high end, but let's just first focus on how we can get her a turn 0 ult. Playing any endgame mode, we always start with half energy, which means Rappa will start with 70. But when doing her skill, which is not notable by the way and is similar to any regular AoE skill like Herta, we get 30 energy. We're now at 100 out of 140, which is still a ways away. This is where the technique comes in, where Rappa basically starts surfing, similar to a certain Shark Girl in a different game. But when she comes into contact with enemies, she starts the battle dealing 30 toughness to each enemy and doing 200% of Rappa's break damage to the target and 180 to the adjacent targets, while gaining 10 energy, putting us at 110 out of 140. Before I get to the last 30 energy, I want to explain the technique's damage and also the new mechanic that Rappa introduces, as it will be important to us later. As we read, it deals 200% of Rappa's break damage to all targets. Simple enough. So what about the adjacent target part? Well, looking at my chart, we can see that enemies with 1 adjacent enemy get 1 additional damage instance, and those with 2 get 2 more damage instances. This is by far the most damaging technique in the game, but even that doesn't matter too much. What I actually want to talk about is actually the interesting wording that's present. It states deals break damage, not break effect. Currently speaking, the only people who do this in the game are Boothill and Roame, but for them, the enemies must be or get broken. For Rappa, the enemies don't even need to be broken to take damage, which our current breakers can't do, with our current best girl dealing 0 damage when the enemies aren't broken. But I'm not saying Rappa can completely ignore the need to break to deal damage, as we'll learn later in the video, but just the fact that we can deal break damage even when the enemies aren't broken. The next important thing to understand is the fact that we now follow a different damage formula compared to all the other characters. Here it is on the screen, but the important thing to know is the 1 plus break effect and also the base damage. The 1 plus break effect part is pretty self-explanatory, but how do we get this base damage? Well, this chart. As you can see, the max toughness of the enemy and our level now greatly impact our damage. As such, with Rappa, you're gonna want to get her to level 80. Also, this means she kinda gets adaptive damage where she does more damage to enemies with higher toughness and lower with enemies with less. But let's just look at the number in the front, ranging from 2 to 0.5. As we know, fire and physical break deal the most initial damage, with imaginary and quantum dealing the least. This is why. So how exactly impactful is this? Thankfully, I can use Mr. Global's calculator to find out. Using an enemy with 120 toughness and giving ourselves 300 break effect at level 80, the 2 multiplier, like fire break, deals 34,800 damage, while the 1 multiplier gives 17,400 damage. Yeah, this is not a nice looking pattern. As expected, imaginary damage does not do a lot, sitting at 8,700. But worry not, as Rappa's kit will resolve this issue. I know this was supposed to talk about the technique, but this had to be inserted somewhere, and this was the best spot in my opinion. But let's get back to her energy. We last left off at 110 out of 140, so where's the other 30? I really hope it's not pay to win. Yeah, it's her Lightcone, who would have guessed. We get some nice break effect, the 30 energy we're missing, and some action advance too. If you're going for Rappa, I would highly recommend you get this too. The other options would be the Gacha Lightcone after the Charming Falls, giving 56% break and 16% speed at S5, and Eternal Calculus from the Herta store, which will give her speed and attack for attack trace. These are pretty okay alternatives, but no signature Lightcone. But speaking of the energy for the ult, let's talk about the ult. As we know, basic attacks generally aren't special, with Rappa's being no different. But when Rappa ults, she enters the seal form state, gaining 1 extra turn, 3 special charges called Chroma Ink, which gives her an enhanced basic attack. She also gains 50% break efficiency like Firefly, and 30% final break effect increase, which is pretty huge. So if you had 300 break effect, you'll get another 100. After she does these 3 enhanced basics, she leaves her C form state. But before she leaves her C form state, let's talk about her enhanced attacks, Ningu Demon Bane Petal Blade. This move has 3 attack instances. The first 2 hits are a blast and the third is an AoE. I've put the attack percent values and its distribution on screen, but that doesn't matter too much for a break character. It also states that she will get toughness reduction equal to 50% of the original toughness value for enemies that are imaginary weak. This, by the way, works the exact same way as Firefly. The important thing is actually the toughness value reduction, which I'll show on the screen, which impacts our breaking and super break damage. This is also pre-Rappa's talent, with the only thing changing being the blue values, or the third hit, that only increases, which I'll get to later. This attack also only gives us 20 energy, which is honestly not a lot if we want 100% uptime for the 140 cost ult. Let's now talk about how she gets an extra turn. The first thing to know is that if you have Rappa's ult on her turn, activate it so you get 2 enhanced basic attacks. If you skill or basic before ulting, you'll only get 1 enhanced basic attack. The next thing to know is how it's not action advance but rather an extra turn, which can impact how buffs go. Let's first look at Firefly and if you use the Watchmaker before Firefly transforms or during the same turn. As you can see with the blue, Firefly will get the buff for the normal skill, and then when she transforms, her first enhanced basic attack will be buffed by Watchmaker, but subsequently the next one will not. But if we held the Watchmaker buff to after Firefly transforms, we now get it for 2 enhanced skills. Now let's see how it works for Rappa in 2 scenarios, the first when she doesn't have ult during her turn and the other where she does. For the first scenario, if we decided to use the buff before she ults, it will last for your skill, your extra turn's enhanced basic attack, and the one after. But if we decided to save it during her extra turn, it will last for all 3 enhanced basic attacks. If Rappa is sitting on her ult, of course just use Watchmaker then to be able to buff up all 3 enhanced basic attacks. This is the same principle as casting Bronya's ult during Blades or Boothill skill animation. But dang, we only have 3 things left on the kit and we still have nothing about break and her damage source. Nothing until now. Let's finally talk about the meat and potatoes of her kit, that being her talent, Ninja Tech Endurance Gauge. Rappa's final hit of her enhanced attack will now get an additional break damage instance equal to 60% of her break to targets, and also adds 2 more toughness damage to the final attack. This additional toughness will help our super break damage. And remember, this damage doesn't need a broken enemy to deal some damage, unlike super break which needs a broken enemy. But as you can see, even with this, it's still not the most damage as imaginary break still falls behind the other elements. Plus it's only half the normal break with its 60% multiplier. But this is where the stacks come in. When an enemy gets broken, Rappa gains these charges, 1 for normal enemies and 2 if the enemy is an elite or higher, as you can see from the next trace, Sky High. These charges straight up increase the multiplier by 50% and also increase the toughness damage by 1 per stack for the final hit. Going back to my previous chart, but updated with the talent, it now looks like this. This is a really big damage increase per stack, which is where the issue comes in as it consumes all the stacks when Rappa deals her 3rd hit. But being imaginary with super high break effect and Ruanmei as well, once you break an enemy, they're not going to have another turn anytime soon. So how the heck do we get more charges or even just high stacks? The only way currently is by killing the enemies so more enemies spawn in a mode like Pure Fiction, or moving on to Wave 2 in Memory of Chaos with new enemies. There's also the Exo Toughness mechanic, which gives Rappa double her stacks, but the issue is it's not that common right now. Though I can't quantify the numbers, TLDR, she can deal an obscene amount of damage but is currently limited by how many stacks she can get from her talent. Moving on to her final trace, Sea Echo, Rappa gains a 60% super break instance on all 3 hits of her enhanced attacks if the enemy is broken. Firefly has a similar mechanic but with 35 or 50% depending on her break. In a vacuum, just like Firefly, this damage is not a lot. But when you pair with Ray and Harmony Trailblazer, this not a lot of damage becomes big PP damage. But besides her Eidolons, that's her entire kit. I'll quickly go over her E1 and E2. E1 ignores defense by 15%, which can stack up with Iron Cavalry and E1 Ruan Mei if you have it. That part is pretty nice, but the bigger thing is the 20 energy you get after you leave her enhanced state. This is really important as we covered earlier that she kinda struggles with energy. But even with this, Rappa will still have energy issues, so let's talk about it before we go to E2. After ulting, we can do 3 enhanced basic attacks which give us 60 energy, plus the initial 5 we get when casting our ult. This is a far cry from the 140 cost ult which even her talent, Sky High, will have trouble battering Rappa. You seriously need her to get kills, have your team break elites, or just have her get hit a bunch of times. But the last one is fairly unlikely if the enemies are going to be broken. Moving on to E2, it helps her break faster with the first 2 hits of the main target dealing more toughness damage by 50%. This won't increase her damage too much directly as most of her damage is coming from her talent / 3rd hit, but it rather helps you break the elite enemies so your team can deal their super break damage. And that's her kit. In regards to how you want to build her, just do as you would a Firefly, with an attack body, speed boots, attack orb, and a break rope. I literally just yoinked this from the Firefly page, but yeah. For substats, just get the usual speed, break effect, and attack. I'll spend this next section just talking about Rappa's current state and how she can get fixed by upcoming units. So I've heard people do the usual doom and gloom for Rappa after the previous changes, but from just the version 4 videos I've seen, Rappa seems to be doing just fine if you play her well. I'll link some videos in the description if you're curious, but just keep in mind that these MOCs are biased and favored towards the new DPSs, and in this case Rappa, which it kinda solves her energy issue. I've also heard that she's only good in Pure Fiction, which I don't think is necessarily true if you just look at some version 4 MOC runs. Depending on the MOC, she can either perform just fine or honestly struggle if it's a bad matchup. But that's just how it be sometimes, just like how Jinlu can struggle against Aventuring. The biggest issue right now would 100% be her energy and her potential inability to consistently get high stacks of her talent. Currently, there isn't anything we can do team-wise to alleviate this issue, and it'll be pretty dependent on the enemy lineup. Because of this, I'll assume Rappa would just be a late bloomer and become super strong when the right teammate comes. I'll put this supposed rumor of our Foxian's new kit on screen and how she could potentially become Rappa's best teammate. I also heard stuff along the lines of action advancing enemies, but again, these are just rumors. The other idea I heard for a new teammate is having a character who can implant an exo toughness bar on the enemies. This could be super huge for break units who will essentially double dip on initial break damage, but especially for Rappa who would essentially get double the amount of charges. These are just rumors and ideas I've heard, so just take everything I've said in this section with a grain of salt. But that's everything. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you learned something new or just understand Rappa's kit a bit better. I want to say check the pinned comment if it exists just in case I made a mistake. But besides that, I hope you all have a wonderful day and